Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us again on the Pondcast. Tonight is episode 37, and we have Jordan Gray of the Turtle Survival Alliance and social media fame. Many of you probably have gotten to know him through Instagram and or Facebook. And as always, we've got Anthony and myself, Steve, here with you tonight. Our big topic tonight is we're actually going to talk mostly about the TSA Conference that's coming up in August. It's basically a month away. And real quick, if you haven't registered and want to, the early bird rate ends at midnight tonight. But so we're going to talk about what the conference is and why private keepers should be interested in something that's more focused on conservation than private husbandry. So thanks again for joining us.
Right. Thank you guys for having me. I apologize to everyone out there in TV land if all of a sudden I start coughing and possibly end up on the floor in convulsions. I've been sick all weekend and have an acute sinus infection, which should tell everybody, don't go snorkeling, it's dangerous. So we're going to have a lengthy discussion about why the private keeper should come to a Turtle Survival Alliance conference. Steve and I have talked a lot about this at length, and I've talked to some other people, big wigs in the turtle conservation community, and I'm glad we're going to be able to bring Anthony in on this. Typically, when I talk to Anthony, I talk about his 2004 World Cup of Basketball run in which he missed the final shot, much like in the movie Finding Forrester. But I guess we can talk about that another night.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Thank you. 2004, isn't that the year that USA lost to Argentina, I think?
That's correct. So it seems like my story has some traction.
Right.
Anthony does know his basketball history.
I wouldn't have played for the U.S. though. I think I look much more like a European-born player.
Oh, yeah, you're lying.
Like a Jonas Valanciunas, like that type of thing.
Jonas Valanciunas.
Who could hit a mean hook shot with both hands and also flip over your Volkswagen.
No, I don't believe you.
Yeah, I can't, but Jonas can. I can't, but he can't. Not me.
So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the TSA conference. So every year we have a conference or a symposium. This year is the 15th annual symposium on the conservation and biology of tortoises and freshwater turtles. That extended name is unfortunately to exclude the sea turtles. They get their own symposium every February, and we still love our sea turtles, but we have to face the fact that the Turtle Survival Alliance and the IUCN Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group does focus on the about 433 other taxa of chelonians around the world. So either way, every August we get a big group of people, and it's an amazing mix match of husbandry practitioners, of field researchers, of laboratory researchers, of tried and true conservationists. We get people from NGOs, stakeholders who are interested in turtle and tortoise conservation and how to make it work. So really everybody comes together as a big community. And that's what I love about it so much, is that when you get there, like I'm saying, you might see a face like Steve Enders from the Turtle Room, and Steve is heavily involved with the captive husbandry side of it, and promoting chelonian conservation through captive husbandry. But also you might see somebody else there, like Mitch Gibbons, one of my heroes, child, who dedicated his life to chelonian conservation, as well as the conservation of other animals in the southeastern United States. So, and you're talking about just in the first few minutes, you're seeing somebody from this part of the world, this part of the world, and it's a really great experience to be able to bring these people together.
Right, absolutely.
Well,
I think that's the one thing that it offers that others don't. See, please.
Oh, that's okay. You mentioned, getting to meet Whit Gibbons, a childhood hero. And like, I remember when our friend Curtis, came to the Tucson conference, he got to meet John Iverson, who's done a lot of work with mud turtles. And, for Curtis, that was like a big lifetime, moment to get to meet a guy like John Iverson and get to, take a picture with him and have conversations with him about those species that he is so passionate about. And so that's like one of those like great, cool things that can happen at a conference like this is when you get the private keepers and and these conservation personalities together, you can get these really neat conversations and moments that happen that really help both sides learn and gain understanding about these animals.
Right. I mean, you get amazing conversations, especially when they're started by my good friend and distant cousin, John Green, out there in Southern California. Now, John Green, when he starts a conversation, you better know it and you better be ready for it. But it is really cool because, like, just to use him as an example, John's known in the herpetoculture community, especially with chelonians. And but to see somebody like that who really believes in conservation as well and wants to see these animals that he loves so much still have a place in the wild, to see like John Green like mix it up with Jeffrey Lovitch, for instance. I remember that last meeting. I mean, you're taking two totally different worlds, but both with the same passion and love for this animal, and being able to bring them together and they can learn from each other. Because that's the whole thing, is all this is still learning, for the academics. There's a lot of learning to do about the whole hobby and husbandry side of it, because let's face it, chelonians are wrapped up in herpetoculture, and people throughout the world own them. I believe they are the most common reptilian pet throughout the world, and that is something that conservationists have to understand. And the best way to understand that, whether, like I said, you're an academic or a field conservationist or whatever, is you make bonds, you make friendships, and you really get to learn what the other side is about. I guarantee you this: if let's just say I'm talking to John, or I'm talking to Steve, or I'm talking to Anthony, or anybody, and I say, we're doing this really, really cool project with North American wood turtles. Or Steve or John's like, man, I really love North American wood turtles. I work with them in captivity because out here in Southern California, or now luckily for Anthony and Steve, they have wood turtles native to their states. But, just as an example, you could put any turtle there. I work with these in captivity, but man, I love this turtle so much. How can I help it still prosper in the wild? Or, how can I help those who do help it prosper? So it's, again, just a really neat way to connect those people.
That's terrific. Steve, you had something?
No, I was just taking a nice deep breath.
Oh, just taking a nice deep breath. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
One of those days where I've got to catch my breath.
Understood. Steve's been working really hard. He's got a lot of important things going on. We'll tell you probably on the next podcast. But
we hope.
The question I had was, and I obviously want to do this in a way that's respectful. I've been to the TTPG conference. I really have enjoyed it, and the approach there and the emphasis is on captive breeding. So there are folks who are husbandry specialists. They're big into the herpetoculture, like you said, kind of the hobby of keeping animals, and they try to get involved in the conservation side. But maybe they feel a little more in their comfort zone going to just hang out with a whole conference full of people who kind of share the same views as them. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of stepping out of your comfort zone if you're one of those people that are maybe on the fence, for both sides? Because you're talking about these different sides coming together, and surely someone who just works with animals in the wild and has maybe a thought that animals shouldn't be in captivity, or the opposite, who thinks all animals should be kept in captivity until, you know, the chances of the world changing or whatever. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really great thing to bring up. You know, when we talk a lot about conservation, you not only talked about logistics and, practicability, but you also have to take in, you know, people's philosophic views on it. There's so many different components of conservation, and you have to look at a multi-pronged approach. So, okay, so let's talk, yeah, like you're saying, let's talk about people stepping out of their comfort zone. Let's say I work mostly with chelonians, but there's also a lot of other reptile and amphibian herpetofaunal species that I'm really interested in. If I go to a symposium and it's, let's just say it's the Herps and Icks symposium, my first thing I'm going to do is probably gravitate to people I know from the chelonian conservation and husbandry and zoo and all that world. But there's still a lot I want to learn. You know, you're always going to have that. It's like going to, your first day of high school and you see the people you know. But what always happens from there, you know, you make one conversation with somebody, maybe in a class, and then you sit with them at their table during lunch. And then you make another, conversation. They're like, hey, you want to hang out with us after school and see what we do? You know, it's really no different. And think about how much, effort you want to put into it, because, you know, there's so many ways that people can go. Like, you think about what you're doing, you know, like each of us can only do so much in a day. And especially people like me who need our grandpa naps in our day, we probably do a little bit less. But yeah, there's only so much you can do. But the chance to meet other people and have them say, you know, why don't you come and start this, maybe start a project with us. And so that brings me to a good point with the Turtle Room. I'm in the Turtle Survival Alliance's North American Freshwater Turtle Research Group, and along with Director Eric Muncher. Eric doesn't come from a herpetoculture background at all. He's not speaking bad about Eric, but he is a tried and true field researcher. And so the breeding, the husbandry, all that into chelonians isn't something that's part of his background. But, you know, he and Steve Enders, you're Steve Enders, by the way, Steve, in case you forgot that.
I've heard of him.
They're both from Pennsylvania, and they both have this passion for turtles. So they got a conversation started in Tucson about how can we start a project in Pennsylvania that creates a collaboration between the Turtle Survival Alliance's NAFDRG and the Turtle Room, and focuses on one of the most belugared species in the Northeast United States, and that's the wood turtle, Glyptemes and sculpta. And that was, I mean, so from there, you know, NAFDRG and Turtle Room have already collaborated to do surveys. We've had new people who want to join in and help out with these surveys. And if you already look at the people who are involved, it is such a mix. I mean, you got people who work for conservation organizations. You have people who, by day are school teachers, or you have people who work for state agencies. You have people who work for consulting firms. So you already have all these people who bring different life experiences to help this one turtle. So I know this is a long-winded answer, but if you, you know, let's just think about the common hobbyist, the common herpetoculturist who's breeding chelonians. One of the things that gets brought up a lot is, well, how can we give back? You know, we go to these conferences, say you come to the conference, you know, you meet everybody from the Turtle Survival Alliance, and you meet these different stakeholders in chelonian conservation. Well, how can we give back? You know, one of the big things you always hear from herpetoculturists, and naturally so, is we love these turtles. There's these areas where, you know, maybe the founding animals of this colony once came from there, once harvested from there, but now that state closed the harvest for those turtles. And we would love to help repatriate the turtles. That becomes a very sticky subject. It's true. You know, in a perfect world, you know, we'd be able to just say, yeah, we're going to repatriate areas with spotted turtles. We're going to repatriate areas with box turtles. But it's not, you know, unfortunately, so much. Just being able to do repatriation efforts, not only is it not always that easy and should be discussed on a species by species basis, but also, you know, going by the different states' laws and the regulations by the state agencies, it is something that we're not really at the point of yet.
Right.
However, that doesn't mean that we can't get there in the future. You know, the thing is, let's say somebody in herpetoculture, they say, well, they have a good argument. They can say, well, here's a reason why we can use these animals, you know, for blank, blank, blank reason to repatriate. Now, I'm personally not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just giving a hypothetical. You know, you come to a gathering of all these stakeholders, and then you're able to express your ideas, and you're able to get real-time feedback into, okay, maybe that's a good idea, or, well, we actually already have experience there, and here's some reasons why it won't work. Oh, it won't work? Well, let's talk more. How can we make it work? There's all these conversations and avenues that people can get to at a symposium like this, where people are brought, because there's nothing better than bringing people face to face. You know, on the internet, on the Faces book, and on Instagram, or the Pondcast, or whatever, we can only learn so much about each other, and you can also only get so much information. It's easy to come up with preconceived notions of individuals and who they are just by their social media presence or profile. And that's why these type of conferences, because they bring people face to face. So if somebody, let's just say 30 years from now, says, you know what, we really need to repatriate this species, well, guess what? We talk to blank and blank, who has a, you know, a colony from whoever knows where, and they established in this year, and we could use those animals to help repatriate. It's really just doing a lot of forward thinking and being able to isolate the issues, work on them, and then establish protocols for the future.
And there's probably, with a lot of species, there's probably not a huge chance. You never know, though, like you said. Who knows what will happen a few decades down the line. But there are a lot of species that are kept, and people will use them as an argument for conservation. I'm keeping this because it's a rare animal. I'd love it for there to be more rare animals in the world. But if you don't know the locality or the genetic purity of an animal, it can be really difficult. A lot of times we're making animals of, you know, a muddy gene pool, or mutts, so to speak, where the animals are of uncertain genetics, and we're not sure where they really fit in. So would we be, you know, repatriating the wild with a population of animals? So it's really important, and that's a challenge to And again, this is getting out of your comfort zone. So for captive breeders and people who are trying to breed these animals in captivity, you know, that's a challenge and something that's not comfortable, but it's the reality. So you were talking also about how you're getting some kind of constructive criticism a lot of times when you're presenting at these conferences. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, it might feel good to go and do a presentation and have everybody giving you high fives and slapping you on the buns when you walk off stage. But if you,
I would slap your buns, Anthony.
I would definitely slap yours. Everyone knows how I feel about you, Jordan. You know, I'm not hitting on you, but I'm as close as I can be without actually hitting on you. So yeah, I think, you know, when you're in a room with the absolute best, the one thing that Jordan actually hasn't mentioned yet, and this is not constructive criticism of you, Jordan, at all.
I'm ready for you.
These are the biggest names from around the world, not the United States, the world. So when you read the most important paper on a species that is important to you, you know, when you really want to research a species, you're not reading what Reptiles magazine has on them. No offense to Russell Case. But you're reading the peer-reviewed journal that has 4 names on it that says everything you need to know on that species. And guess what? The names on those journals, they're the people who are at the conference, and they're the ones sitting in the crowd when you're talking about the captive propagation of that species. So when would it ever be better to get constructive criticism than from the people who know that species best, have a little bit of skin in the game, and don't want to see someone just going up there and flippantly throwing ideas out about a species that they've studied in the wild or have, you know, known about for decades and decades. So you're never going to get that the way that you will at the TSA conference. And that's why I think it's so important.
Oh, absolutely. The other thing about when you have these multi-day conferences that are in a single location, and, you know, everybody books their hotel rooms. By the way, book your hotel room. Get it now because they are almost gone. You know, when people stay, it gives the opportunity to just have dinner with somebody. You know, I remember my first time to TSA conferences. And yeah, you see these figures who you're like, wait a minute, that's the guy who wrote the book that I learned turtles about when I was a kid. And you walk up to them and say, hey, you know, your work meant so much to me. And you can talk to that person right there and they respond. And you'd be amazed how often they then engage in meaningful conversation with you.
Well, they're also gracious and humble for the most part. Almost everyone there to a name, and it really is a great atmosphere for engaging in networking and learning through personal communication with these people who you never otherwise might even get a chance to talk with. And I don't know, but for me, attending my first conference, you know, kind of lit an even bigger fire in, you know, my conservation-minded side, which I think that you can experience by attending one of these conferences, because you really get to kind of see how things can work together and how you know, captive breeding plus you know, lab-based research and wild-based research all kind of work together to really provide the best outcomes.
Right. And the interesting thing about the captive husbandry side of it is that, you know, it is always evolving. You know, the learning process is never done, because, you know, people might have this much success, and then all of a sudden they hit a year where they stop having success. And then maybe there's another year that they stop having success. And it's like, what's causing that? Well, luckily, you're bringing together people from various backgrounds who can provide, you know, good hypotheses of why that is happening. Like, yeah, let's just say somebody builds an incredible enclosure for the big-headed turtle, And, you know, they're having fairly good luck with them, but based on all the research they had done and talking to other people, they're not having the greatest luck. You know, at a symposium like this, let's just say you are able to actually talk with maybe one of the primary researchers of this species, and they might be able to say, well, tell me about your habitat. And you tell them all the specifics, and then they say something like, well, what's interesting is, although you have almost everything correct and it all sounds good, you know, the species from this area where your animals are originally from actually spend this much amount of time in water that's actually about 2 degrees Celsius less than you're keeping them at. Or they spend this much more time in a fossorial state or something like that. And it can make people go, oh, wow, you know, this is information that I may not have gotten from, you know, looking in any book or talking to somebody else. And it is a great way to be able to bring people together. Now, on the flip side, you know, people who are out there in the field or, you know, on the front lines doing conservation work, they get to experience a lot. But what some don't always get to experience is the captive husbandry side. And when you're, you know, when you're out in the field, you might be on a trek for days and maybe find one of the species you're looking for. You know, some of the species, especially in Southeast Asia now, are so rare that you are lucky if you find one in a week, in a month. Some are so rare, you're lucky if you find one in the whole year. But there might be people who have this turtle because for whatever reason, you know, years ago, they were brought into captivity and they have sustained a group of these individuals. And those captive husbandry practitioners can actually give information to the researcher that the researchers might not actually able to get because of their lack of finding turtles. And maybe that information could lead to a better understanding of the turtles that they're trying to find. You know, people who practice captive husbandry, they're around their turtles 24/7, but pretty darn close to it. Especially if people who don't go to work, you know, off-site, maybe they work from home. And there's a lot of little just nuances in the turtle or tortoise biology and things that you know, basically make that turtle or tortoise that could be very beneficial that the captive husbandry practitioners being able to pick up on, that the academic or the field researcher or the conservationist might not exactly know. And so that is something captive breeding or the captive husbandry practitioners, whether it be private or whether it be zoos or aquariums, brings to the conference, brings in the conversation.
You know, I actually have a question, a follow-up question for Steve, of all people. Jordan mentioned the big-headed turtle, and it's a species that we talked about here before. But I can think of 3 important players. And Steve, you have to understand, Steve is like, with the TSA conference, is like, and I mean this with respect, he knows I mess with him all the time. He's like a, you know, 11-year-old girl at a One Direction concert. He gets really excited about who maybe he'll get to see, and maybe he'll get an autograph and a handshake or a high five, that sort of thing.
I don't do autographs.
You light up my world like nobody else.
Oh, he hasn't been the same since they broke up. But seriously, yeah. But so we're talking. So I'm going to ask him because he actually keeps a really good mental record of who goes and all that type of stuff. So we're talking about the Chinese big-headed turtle, and there are 3 really big players in the United States that I'm aware of, and I'm not an expert on this species, but you have our friend Mark Wallace, who's the best probably the best producer of them, and does so as a private hobbyist. Then there's the Prospect Zoo in Brooklyn, who we've spoken about before as well. And then there is the TSA's Turtle Survival Center in South Carolina. Steve, those three players, have they been to the conference in the past couple years?
The two non-private keeper ones have been.
So Mark hasn't been able to make it out?
No, Mark has not appeared at a conference.
Oh, I thought he was, because he was doing the design and everything. So I thought I was onto something, and I thought that he had been there. But either way,
we invited him, but he did not come.
He couldn't go because we wanted him to do because Steve chairs the captive husbandry portion of the talk, so he knows very well whether or not Mark was able to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't mean to call you out on here. But there you go.
You got to make sure Mark comes this year.
Yeah, now there's pressure. So maybe that was a good thing.
Probably just bought his plane ticket as we speak.
Yeah.
Actually, South Carolina, he might be able to drive.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So there you go. So now there's a good chance that he'll be there this year. But the point is that there are important players. If that's your species, then there's no excuse not to go. If you have the means to make it happen, and it's like that with a lot of species. I mean, if there's something that you're really into, and then there's an opportunity for you to benefit on a way that you probably never even knew possible.
Yeah, I've been trying to get the guy who wrote the book on Spenglary out to the conference, but it's just been a little tough.
Man, who is that guy? Like he's all playing basketball or something.
I never heard of him. He sounds handsome though, whoever he is.
Yeah, he's basically the Antonio Banderas of Spenglary.
Right.
If he was a little shorter and more Latin.
Wow.
I'm embarrassed. I'm trying to go. I'm sorry. They're talking about me, anyone who doesn't know.
I really wanted Anthony to talk in my session this year. Most likely he's not going to be able to, which makes me a sad panda.
Sad pandas are cute, however.
Very cute. Pandas are just cute in general. Anthony's working on this really amazing project, and hopefully next year we'll be able to have Anthony come and talk. Something actually that I do want to talk about is about, again, why the hobbyists should come to this conference is that, there's a lot of different words that get thrown out there, and some are thrown out there as synonyms when they're not exactly synonyms. There's so many parts to conservation. Like research, for instance, is a part of conservation. It can be, but it's not conservation. The work that stems from that research can be conservation. Captive breeding is not necessarily conservation. Is it preservation? Yes, you are preserving that animal in a state, a live state here in the world. But all these things can build to the goal of conservation. The main thing is understanding where your piece fits in the puzzle. If somebody is captive breeding, and in their mind, they're captive breeding, let's just say tons of Geoclemys hamiltonii, the Indian spotted pond turtle. Let's just say they're producing lots of them, and it's
let's just say in Florida or somewhere. Yeah, let's just say.
Who knows? Yeah, and they see it as a preservation or a conservation act. Well, the main thing why a symposium like this is so important is being able to chat and say, again, like Anthony was saying, constructive criticism. Is the work that you're doing something that actually could fit in somewhere in the future to a conservation program, or is it currently under the guise of preservation and conservation, when in fact it might not be able to realistically fit in.
It's my favorite phrase. I hate to interject because I love what you're saying, but
No, go ahead, Anthony.
That's something that means so much to Steve and myself, and something when we were having our first talks, when we were just buddies on, you know, on a web-based forum, just talking about our ideas, you know, back in the days, and you know, where do we fit in? We're trying to find our niche, and it was difficult for us at first. Like, you know, we're not biologists, we're not researchers, we're not conservationists, we're not, but you know, well, what can we do? We felt like a little inadequate, but at the same time, like, we're college educated, we're smart, we have a way with people, and myself as a social worker, Steve as a teacher, we try to do it as best we can through people, and that's why the Pondcast exists. And just the other day, last Thursday, actually, I was able to attend an event and be a part of an event at a camp where there were 600 campers, 600 kids, and we were able to educate those kids about common snapping turtles, a species that up until very recently here in Connecticut was commercially harvested, and people would actually come from other northeastern states to come and take our snapping turtles and then ship them overseas because there were no limits. So I mean, look at that picture. I mean, that is amazing. I mean, when you can actually get out and touch that many people about turtles and tortoises, then you're really doing something. It took a while. Like, all I wanted to do was move to Florida and be a tortoise breeder. I wanted to have a sulcata farm. Boy, is that something I don't want to do now. And those feelings of inadequacy, like, you know, well, I'm just a social worker. Like, I'm not as important as Jordan Gray. I'm not as important as all these other folks. So I think, you know, my message to everyone is, yes, you like to keep animals, but then why are you keeping them? Because conservation, like you just said, is a small piece of it, because that's like best case scenario. There's a really good chance that a lot of people out there who have 1,000 animals at their house, none of those animals will ever go to true conservation, ever be returned to the wild. So what are you doing it for if you're not trying to educate, share information, and get other people involved and passionate about the animals that you're passionate about? And then also understanding, like I said earlier, that everything you do has to be really focused. Otherwise, it's a waste of your time. And this is something that really matters to me a lot. I think because of our fear of getting out of our comfort zone, sometimes we don't challenge ourselves enough. And I'm talking about the captive breeders out there as well. Like, we don't challenge ourselves enough to. And you use the phrase from the Dave Lee article, the guise of conservation. Like, we have to really be real with ourselves and look at every single angle and really listen to the people who have a different view than ours, because they might be right, unfortunately. So how do we make sure we're keeping the right animals for the right reasons and the right way?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, Anthony.
Yeah.
You know, one of the difficult things to realize, you know, like we've talked about, is that there are some species who very well are already functionally extinct in the wild, or others that are heading that way. And right now, we're not in a position in every scenario to be able to bring back that turtle's numbers in situ. You know, the fact of the matter is that the Kilonian trade, the buying and selling of turtles and tortoises, whether it's captive bred or wild caught, is a huge industry. And we first have to really get a hold of exactly where the industry is going. And a lot of that has to do with personal responsibility. Because, you know, like we're talking about, you know, people, you know, we've heard different things about, you know, terms like flooding the market. Oh, I want to produce this many of this species and I'm going to flood the market. Which will hopefully help drive the price down of this species and make them poached less in the wild. Well, that might work for some things, but, you know, for others, the demand is so high that even just that idea of flooding the market is not satiating the hungry appetite for that turtle. And I use, of course, the term hungry appetite as a play on words, but either way, you know, in some of these areas, like let's look in Southeast China where the population is just ever expanding. I mean, anywhere you go, the population is increasing really in the world. Yeah, sure, you might have some county or some state who's seen a decrease, but you know, whatever. We're not talking about that. We're talking about it as a whole. The fact of the matter is the price on some of these turtles is still too high and the demand for them too great that all the captive breeding efforts that we do right now might not make a great impact for them in the wild right now. Mm-hmm. And that again goes into what Anthony's talking about as having, you know, a focus on where you're going and what you're doing. Because they're like in the future, these turtles and tortoises can be preserved. You know, there are ways to do it. They can be preserved in the wild. Populations might even be able to be rebound in the wild, but it's going to take the proper framework and the proper players doing their respective jobs to the best of their ability to get there.
Right.
You know, we might not be able to make the numbers of, you know, Koara, let's just say Aro capitata explode in the wild in the next several years. You know, you know, it's a species that have been heavily impacted by commercial trade, whether it be for traditional medicine, food, or pets.
I wanted to show you one, Jordan. This is a quang tongue. You were talking about you're talking about animals that are functionally extinct in the wild.
Yeah.
Aren't really found much anymore. So this is one such animal that's bred very easily in captivity, and as recently as a few months ago, the Asian market decided they should be very valuable, and the price jumped up like wild. And yeah, I mean it's one of those species as well where it's been really tough to keep like a stud book on them, but you know, captive breeding is happening, and there definitely hasn't been any conservation through captive breeding, even though it's been really successful. But here they are being preserved, at least for the time being. So I wanted to throw that at you while I had one sitting right next to me.
Okay. Yeah, so that goes into the preservation of the species, and so yeah, so trying to go back. I just started again. I've been sick, so I had a cough that I was trying to suppress. But the idea that we want to strive for is that species who have seen their numbers greatly depleted in the wild, we want to strive to have those species in the wild, you know, still in 40, 50, 100, 1,000 years. But the only way to do it is for the people who care about them, and whether it's caring about them through captive breeding, through conservation, through outreach, through research, just talk to each other, and be able to establish goals together. Because if this, and this don't happen, then let's just say, again, hypothetically, these turtles who could potentially go back in the wild for repatriation, if all this framework hasn't been set up to protect the habitat, to change the culture of the people who would go and collect these turtles, to change the make a change in the let's just say income of the area. And I know, like our friend Scott Tregresser over in Bangladesh and Myanmar is helping institute those kind of things through the Creative Conservation Alliance, where they're, helping places plant crops that will hopefully help them focus on another way to make money than collecting turtles. But if all these things don't happen, then that goal of releasing turtles to repatriate an area is
Right.
just completely out of, it's out of the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chance of the world changing. We talked about that film before, the documentary. That's actually extremely sad and even morbid for the animals involved. Just you're trying tooth and nail, throwing everything you have into conservation through whatever means, and really we're just waiting for the world to change, at least in certain places. I know with some of the Asian species, maybe there's been some protected areas where animals, we at least got close enough to try as like a pilot program to release some animals and see how things went. That's at least a sign that things maybe are changing for the better in certain areas. But yeah, that's what we're waiting for. We're waiting for the world to become a better place, at least in some areas. Yeah.
Well, here's I'll actually bring up an example that of an amazing rebound that happened because a culture changed. And it also had to do a little bit with some policy, some legislation. Most people around the world are familiar with the diamondback terrapin here in the United States. They're a turtle. I don't think any turtle species in the United States has as many conservation activities dedicated towards one species as diamondback terrapin. You go all along the coast throughout the range, Massachusetts, Texas, and you can find coastal diamondback terrapin projects. When I was thinking about my session for the TSA symposium, I was like, man, I got to try to think of things other than diamondback terrapin projects, because the first thing that pops into my mind for community outreach and conservation is diamondback terrapins. But the change and the rebound happened long before a lot of these projects. So, the diamondback terrapin was a very persecuted turtle, and persecuted in the form of commercialization for the food markets. And it was heavily harvested throughout its range. There was, I don't know if you all know this, but there was actually a revolt. Slaves in Southern Virginia revolted. They refused to work anymore if they didn't stop being fed so much diamondback terrapin.
There's a quote in Pope's book. We talked about people's books and how much they meant on like those of us who have come up. And Clifford Pope's book that was like the Bible of turtles for decades. One of the first lines in the book is turtles are much more well known in their liquid form, something along those lines. And that's it. Like most of us know turtles in their liquid form, and that was in the late 1930s. I believe it was either 1937 or 1939 that book was published, and it gives you kind of an idea of how turtles were known, especially the diamondback terrapins.
Oh yeah, terrapins they were for eating. Okay, that is what that turtle was there for. It was collected. I mean, it is still collected, harvested in a couple states for food or for the commercial pet trade. But for the most part, throughout its range, the commercialization of the turtle has ended. So in the early 1900s, after the terrapins had hit their heyday, the popularity of the turtle stew started to decline. Now, a big part of this is, anecdotes relate to prohibition, because the main ingredient used for diamondback terrapin soup, much like she crab stew, is sherry.
Wow.
And if you weren't using sherry anymore, you weren't making the soup to its proper standard. Therefore, no longer was it worth the price that the diamondback terrapins were commanding by then.
I didn't know that. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Now you also get to in some areas, the diamondback terrapins were just so heavily harvested the price of them started to skyrocket. So all of a sudden, diamondback terrapins, they weren't found on food menus anymore. They weren't, and then when that happened, they weren't really viewed that much as a major market anymore. And what happened? Time went on. People focused on their she crab stew or whatever, and then communities really started to pop up on the coast. Well, diamondback terrapins started to rebound heavily. I mean, if you go to places in the Delaware Bay, southern New Jersey, we're actually right outside New York City, there are diamondback terrapin populations that would blow your mind. I mean, I've been there and seen turtles. It's like it's a heavenly experience being able to see that many diamondback terrapins in one place. And you never would have even pictured that that could have ever been possible after their commercialization during their heyday. But the fact is that things have changed. And instead now what you see throughout the diamondback terrapins range is people who want to help them. I mean, people care about this turtle. So whether it's through some small thing like, not small, but a change in the culture through a change in legislation, or a change in the culture because no longer is something a fad, we can make a big difference for turtles. If we look at the diamondback terrapin, that could be the case for other species. We just have to believe it, and we have to figure out what is going to be the major catalyst that will help them rebound.
That's great.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And you talked about a bit about DBTs during all of that. That's actually a really good segue to this question that we've got from one of our viewers, and partly because diamondback terrapins probably have the highest volume of locally based conservation projects in the U.S. Right? DBTs as a whole probably have the highest volume of local-based conservation projects in the U.S. All up and down the U.S., the eastern seaboard, there are local conservation projects to save the diamondback terrapin. And so one of our viewers gives us this question: what local conservation efforts in the U.S. can we be a part of? What are good suggestions for young kids to be exposed at in a young age so that they can find fun in learning and conservation they can get excited about?
All right, well, that's actually a really great question. This is, again, as pretty much everything I do is is going to include several different answers. But number one is, you can look towards the, places like the Turtle Survival Alliance, places like the Turtle Room, or other organizations that help with turtle conservation. And the people at those organizations, they love these animals so much that they are thrilled to get other people involved. And so a lot of these organizations, I know we at the Turtle Survival Alliance, and I know at the Turtle Room, have staff that answer emails or answer Facebook messages, Instagram messages, emails, that we can easily direct people to the best conservation organization in their area to work with. And because we, as a Kilonian conservation world, we're a network, and we're a network who we talk regularly. Maybe everybody doesn't know everybody personally until they come to the conference. But a lot of, there's pretty much just a 1, maybe 2 degree of separation between everybody in the Kilonian world. And so we can easily find out how to help people. Now, with the Turtle Survival Alliance, we have the North American Freshwater Turtle Research Group. And if you go to www.turtlesurvival.org, you can go to Get Involved, Volunteer, and then the North American Freshwater Turtle Research Group, or TSA NAFTRG. And what TSA NAFTRG does is long-term population research in some of the most beautiful just idyllic spring systems in the United States. We currently have programs in Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, and we may actually be adding another one in the next couple of years, but I won't tell you just where yet. But that is one way to get involved. We actually, yes, we have people fly in from Alaska, California, Washington, Michigan, New England, down to volunteer with us at NAFTRG. And at TSA NAFTRG, it's like a big family. And I know that the guys from the Turtle Room have been out with us in NAFTRG, and it's pretty much one of the best things that you can even be a part of, because everybody loves the same thing. It's a great way to discuss, new research ideas, or if you're a captive husbandry practitioner, new ways to do captive husbandry. Again, picking up on ideas. But I think there are so many avenues to being able to find how to get involved, and the Turtle Survival Alliance and the Turtle Room is a great first step.
Yeah, I think there's several factors that you have to ask yourself when you're looking to get involved. It's where you live geographically, what you have to offer as far as your skill set, your knowledge base, and it doesn't have to be turtles. If you come in and you have an expertise in something that's totally unrelated, that sometimes can be the most helpful thing, because you have a different
statisticians.
Yeah, right. There's such a need for statisticians. Exactly what I'm talking about. And then also your means as well for how able you are to get out and things like that. But it's just like turtles. It's slow and steady. A lot of us have some years ahead of us, and it takes time, to be able to figure out what your niche is and what organizations might be right around you. I personally live in Connecticut, and it's taken me so long to get contacts in Connecticut. I have more contacts in California and Florida and Pennsylvania and Texas and all over the place than I do in my own state of Connecticut. And they're here. It's just,
Connecticut has some beautiful habitats and beautiful turtles too.
Right. It's just taking some time. So, Steve, since you're talking a bit.
Yeah, Anthony makes a great point here on that your skills don't necessarily have to be with turtles. And yeah, if you're a TSA member and you're willing to come out and learn and just do what you can show up at an NAFTRG site as a TSA member. I mean, we'll vet you a little bit beforehand, to make sure you're not going to come in and steal animals away and stuff like that. And I'm sure you can all understand that that's going to be.
Yeah, anybody who steals animals has to deal with Anthony all of a sudden behind them when they turn around.
Precisely.
Like 6 feet of pure power.
Right. But the outreach part is something that various skills can be very beneficial to. Like here at the Turtle Room, if you like writing and researching, we could give you something to do that would benefit outreach and the education piece of this big conservation puzzle. If you're good at graphic design and you know your way around Adobe Illustrator and all those things, I guarantee you Jordan and I can find work where you could contribute to things that he and I are trying to put together in various different areas. If you can take pictures and you're willing to travel.
Oh my gosh, yes. If you can take clear pictures.
If you can take good quality pictures and are willing to travel, granted you have to spend some of your own money to travel because we can't pay to help you do that. But if you are capable of doing that, you could take pictures for the Turtle Room, go take pictures for the TSA, for both, whatever. Like, we can find ways you can help pass our message on.
Right.
If you can, there are endless things. Literally, just tell us what you love to do, and we can probably find a way where you might be able to use that thing to help turtles, even if you aren't necessarily able to go down to Florida and help NAFTRG. Or you live in Minnesota and there are very few, conservation projects you can get in or whatever. But if you look hard enough, you might find them in Minnesota too. I don't really know. Just picking that out because it's kind of a state in the middle of, the country that might be hard to do stuff like that with. If you're on the East Coast, within an hour or two of the coast, I bet we can find you a Diamondback Terrapin program where if you get a background check done and whatever, you'd probably be able to find a way to volunteer. I mean, Jordan helps run one of those in Savannah, Georgia, for instance. The Turtle Room is starting to participate and our own Chris Leone is, helping to coordinate a program in New Jersey as well. So there are like almost endless types of opportunities if you look for them and if you ask the questions. If you don't know where to look, that's when you can email Jordan, email me, Anthony, and we can try to help you find a niche that you can really make a difference in.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
What was I going to say? Something that's big on that is, the outreach, because it's like that whole thing that people. I don't know the exact quote right now. I'm having like a George Bush moment, but like.
It's okay if you misremember the quote. We're okay with that.
Right. Yeah. Where you won't. Like where you won't conserve what you don't know, you won't whatever what you don't love. I don't know the quote. I'm sorry, but either way, and outreach is so important for that. And Anthony, I know Anthony is doing an outreach talk soon. Anthony, what was that talk again?
Thank you, Jordan. What a great transition. I appreciate you. So I had to glance at the paper. On July 22nd, look at these flyers that they made up. They called me the Turtle Man, which I hate that name, but apparently for them, I'm the Turtle Man, and I'll do a talk. And it's for a huge chain of pet stores here in Connecticut. They're calling it Turtle Mania. It has two titles: Turtle Mania and Turtle Palooza, of course, because they couldn't settle on one. So that's what's happening there. And I think it's just a great opportunity to reach a different demographic than we do a lot of times. I think the pet store crowd is one that likes to come into the pet store and ask questions, and that maybe doesn't find the internet right away. And we still get that crowd on Facebook, because Facebook is full of a lot of people that just likes to ask questions first maybe and research second. And not that there's anything wrong with that. We all started in that same place. But it's just an opportunity to get out there, try to meet some new people, spread the word about what's going on, let them know about things like the Turtle Room and obviously the TSA and the TTPG and the Turtle Conservancy, and just try to connect people to resources, but then also just to share some basic knowledge, because I think so many people kind of miss the important points when it comes to turtles. Things that we see as just like basic knowledge that we have known for a while, but that the general public doesn't know. And things that maybe are affecting things like conservation or the natural world around us, like the invasive red ear slider and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's a different venue. I spoke recently at a AP environmental science course at a local high school. I spoke recently for a community mental health program that really went very well, and have spoken at herp and reptile and amphibian and also turtle societies as well. So it's interesting to speak for all of the different audiences and see how you can't do the same presentation for everyone, because they're so drastically different depending on who the audience is. But it's just important to try to be open and available to as many audiences as possible. So I'm excited about it. So if you're in the Northeast, and this will be in Wallingford, Connecticut on July 22nd at 1 p.m. A little confusing on our Facebook page about what the time was, but it says it's from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. And I'm not doing that, like Midnight Madness Turtles.
I think you're
actually, that's a good idea.
And if anybody would like to fund plane tickets so I can go see Anthony talk, please.
Just wait until I get to the TSA, whether it's this year or next year. I'm trying. You guys have to understand, I have two small kids at home. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to our viewers. You guys already know. Two small kids at home. I'm trying. I can't wait to get to the TSA conference the next time I'm there, whether it's this year or next or the one after that. I hope I don't have to go any further than that. But you get what I'm saying.
So true. So just to, kind of wrap up that like little blurb there on, ways to get involved, etc. Like I said, if you have some skills that you think could be useful to the TSA or the Turtle Room or somebody else, you can email Jordan at jgray@turtlesurvival.org, or you can email me at steve@theturtleroom.com. You could email both of us together if you want, because then we've got both of us kind of finding ways that we could, help you do things. So, on that note, we kind of want to, to the symposium and, wrap up our show today.
Okay. Yeah, well, again, so the symposium this year in Charleston, South Carolina, beautiful Charleston. It is from August 6th through the 9th, and you can register at www.turtlesurvival.org. The hotels are they're selling out quickly. We do have some space left, but it like I said, it's rapidly disappearing. This is a very popular symposium, and again, because it's bringing together so many different minds from around the world for the goal of Kilonian conservation. But I think, going back to the whole thing of the private keeper, we all, I think, whether you're a conservationist or a keeper or a researcher, I think we all started probably in the same place. I'll bet when we were young, we went out into the woods and we found ourselves a turtle, or maybe we were driving down the road and we picked up a turtle off the road, or maybe even we went into a pet store and, that cute little thing was staring at us through the glass and we found our first turtle. Well, I'll bet we all started kind of in the same way. And so the important thing to remember is when you come to these conferences, these symposiums, you have all these people who started in the same way, and they probably have a background very similar to yours. And kind of like we were saying before, I'll bet we even read the same books growing up. We read the books by Carl Ernst. We read the books by Russ Mittermeier. We read them by Peter Pritchard or Archie Carr. We get to see some of our heroes. I mean, truly, our heroes growing up, the people who are inspired us to be in this field at these symposiums. So, yeah, as my last thing, I really look forward to seeing people there. If you want to get involved in the Turtle Survival Alliance outside of the symposium, please get a TSA membership. The TSA memberships help go directly towards both in situ, so our range country programs, and ex situ conservation, like at the Turtle Survival Center. Steve, anything else you want to add in there?
I think we've covered it, and we know it's a little late to get to this year's conference possibly, but keep your sights set on when the next one is. They're always in early August, so within the next within the next 6 months, next year's will be announced. We're hoping sooner, I think. But just kind of keep your eyes on it. It's a great opportunity to get out. Even by being there, you're helping show your support to the people that are doing a lot of the work. And I think people get really excited when the private keepers come out, because it shows that you're invested in helping make sure the conference can happen by, buying a ticket to show up, which enables all these people to, work together and collaborate in person. And it's also a great chance for you to learn and for them to even learn from you, because like we said before, lots of opportunities for great conversation for both researcher and private keeper to learn from each other. Jordan and I will be in South Carolina for those several days. And there's a really cool field trip to the Turtle Survival Center that many people are attending as well before the conference gets started.
Right, and actually spots are they're almost full for that, so that's something. If you still think you can make it to the symposium, we do have a field trip on Sunday, August 6th, to the Turtle Survival Center, and I think we have a couple spots left, so try to get in there quick. And so that is going to be an awesome way to see some of these rare species that you may have never seen in person before. Speaking of seeing something, you guys didn't say anything about my diamondback terrapin painting in the background here. If you notice, right about there's a diamondback terrapin in that wave after it got swept out from the North Carolina coast, and it's on its way to Bermuda.
I don't believe you.
So, it's a wonderful painting. When the artist told me that that's what that was, when I saw that speck of black in the wave and they told me what it was, I bought it on the spot.
Your drowned diamondback terrapin. That's unfortunate.
On its way to Bermuda.
It showed up to Bermuda bloated and lifeless. I'm sorry.
Hey, we don't know how those terrapins got out to Bermuda.
That's true. That's true. Before we wrap up, I just want to thank Winding Trails, which is the amazing campground that gave 600 kids an opportunity to care about a turtle, at least for 10 minutes the other day. And also Chris Lugenbuehl, who created the Lugenbuehl Foundation, which saves leatherback sea turtles and also works with National Geographic to do the Critter Camp project, which is the project that we were working on at Winding Trails the other day. So I just wanted to say thank you to them because their work is tremendous. It was awesome just to be there and be a part of it. And I didn't mention that before when I spoke about it. And I also want to thank Jordan. Jordan, man, you are one of the most talented and awesome guys I've ever met in my entire life. I'm not saying something because I know
you're sweeter than the words from Amanda.
Isn't she sweet too? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I know Steve Enders, so for me to say that about you means that you must be pretty awesome. So I'm really grateful that you came on here, but I'm also really grateful just from like a selfish reason. And again, failure to get out of our comfort zone because we invite someone on who we really love and enjoy talking with. But I'm so excited that you're with the TSA, and I know the TSA is really excited, and the entire, turtle and tortoise world as far as the enthusiasts, and the turtles and tortoises themselves ought to be pretty excited.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's a great thing. It really is a great thing. And I said from the moment I met you that it's only a matter of time before you have your own Animal Planet special like Jeff Corwin or something like that. So I don't know if you'll get there, but I think you should. I think you should.
After these last couple things I've done with Animal Planet, you never know. So everybody out there, write to Animal Planet and say Jordan needs his own turtle show.
And he needs Anthony to be his sidekick.
Yeah.
It'd be like Robin Big, but with animals and with turtles.
Oh
my gosh.
It'd be beautiful.
Christopher Big Black Boykin.
As we go through the woods of India and Anthony just knocks down the trees in front of us with his bare arms.
It'd be like Running Wild with Bear Grylls when Shaq was on the episode.
Yes, exactly. As long as it's not like Naked and Afraid, right?
Yeah. Well, I'd be afraid if I was naked with Shaq, but that's for a different conversation. That's for a different podcast. Whoops.
All right, friends.
There can never be too many podcasts. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like episode 37 has naturally come to an end there.
You're welcome.
Talking about Shaq on Naked and Afraid should always end any podcast.
It's in our bylaws.
Yeah. Well, they talked about Shaq naked and afraid. Guess we got to wrap things up now.
Shaq wouldn't be afraid.
Okay, so Anthony's new nickname, everybody who's listening, the White Shaq.
Oof.
Oh, yes.
I can barely.
So happy.
I can barely dunk anymore. That's not a good nickname for me.
All right. For Jordan Gray of the Turtle Survival Alliance, and we're so glad to have you. And for Anthony Pierleone, the guy who wrote the book on Spengleri.
That's right.
I'm Steve Enders, and we're signing off. We'll catch you again the second Monday of September, 1 week after Labor Day. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me on, guys.